Okay, welcome everyone. If we can go to our next slide. This is our fifth meeting on equity improvements for the IGP or Integrated Grid Plan requests for proposals or RFPs. We've been doing this since mid to late last year, and I think we're close to the finish here. To kick us off, I'd like to start with Dean Harvest for a message of aloha. Dean, are you available?
I don't see Dean online
Uh-oh.
yet, Mike.
Well, maybe what we'll do is have Dean finish us off at the end if he can get in on time, get in before the end of the meeting. But for now, why don't we just go ahead to the meeting norms? I'm sorry about that. I always enjoy those. Um, So you've seen these before, I hope, but please practice democracy of time. That is, if you find yourself speaking more than a lot of your other folks in the meeting today, consider giving some room for other people to say their piece. Consider new possibilities and push the envelope on what is possible. We're here to make things better to the best of our imaginations. Please respect and appreciate other people's perspectives. What you bring to this meeting is valuable, but so is what anyone else brings to this meeting. And finally, we have the bike rack for useful ideas that may not fit exactly into what we're doing today, which is trying to build short-term improvements we can implement in the IGP RFPs, but there may be good ideas that fit in the longer-term goals of this docket. Next, I'd like to take just a quick overview of the agenda. So we'll have a presentation from the Ulupono Initiative on community benefits packages. Then we're going to spend some time reviewing the draft staff report that was filed in the docket. We'll try and answer questions about that staff report, and hopefully we'll get some good feedback from everybody on what should be in that report that isn't, how we should say things differently, or if we got it all perfect on the first time, we'll be happy to take your congratulations as well. But really would love your feedback on how we can make it better. And then finally, we'll close out and talk about the next steps, both for the staff report and for this docket. Next slide. So we're going to be taking notes, as we've done in the past. Notes in breakout rooms will not be attributed. So if you'd like to speak with some anonymity, you can do it that way. We won't say who said what. If you would like to comment on the staff report itself without filing full written comments in the docket, you have a couple ways to do that as well. One way is just to use the chat feature. If you use the chat feature while we're all in plenary together like this, your comments can be attributed to you. And if you use the chat feature while in the breakout groups, your comment will not be attributed to you, but other options to get us your feedback, and we'll have some more coming. Let's see. Next, next slide, please. So just as a reminder of where we are in the progress we've made, we set out this process in September of 2023, and we've been having these meetings October, November, December, January. We expect this will be the last one on this topic, but you never know. It's possible we might have more, but I'm hopeful that we can get all the feedback we need today and in the written comments on the staff report. But we are not done with this docket by any means. We are hoping to wrap up this first step and then take the next steps that many of us have already been working hard on identifying before September of 2023, including the 5 tracks and possible other equity solutions that we've learned about and developed during this process in the last few months. So we're getting close to the end of this process, but this docket is not close to its end yet. So I wanted to be clear about that. Next slide, please. So again, feel free to do introductions via the chat. If you want to put that in the chat right now, just to get used to using that function, you can put in your name, your role in your organization, if you've got one. I'll give folks a moment to do that. I'm going to do it myself. Always nice to see who's here. Thanks everybody for using the chat. And I'll give you a few more moments to do that. See who else is here. And as soon as I see it start to slow down, I'll move on to our meeting objectives. Okay, why don't we move on to the meeting objectives? But feel free to keep using the chat to do introductions. So again, three basic objectives today. One is to review options for community benefits packages. So we've talked about these quite a bit during this series of meetings, but we thought it would be helpful to get some outside perspective on it. So we'll have a presentation from the Ulupono Initiative. And then we'll spend a lot of time discussing the recommendations in the staff report, discussing different options from there, and hopefully build some consensus on what those recommendations should be as we finalize the report. And then we'll wrap up by talking a little bit more about how to provide comments and feedback on that staff report and the next steps for this docket. So I think with that, Michael, if you are ready, we can turn it over to you for the presentation on community benefits packages.
Sounds good. Let me try and share my slide deck here. Can everyone see that?
Looks good to me.
Okay, great. Okay, aloha everybody. My name is Michael Colon. I'm the director of the energy sector at Ulupono Initiative. Ulupono Initiative is an impact investment firm focused on Hawaii specific areas of improvement, namely renewable energy, clean, fresh water, sustainable transportation, and sustainable local agriculture. Ulupono has been in Hawaii for over a decade and has been increasingly involved in various dockets and policy work related to renewable energy and supporting our mission. When we have been following along on this energy equity docket and saw an opportunity to raise an idea that we wanted to share, and really kind of starting out looking at the impetus behind why we're making our presentation and making this recommendation is based on the premise that as we move forward looking at the IGP and looking at the decarbonization pathway study, which just came out, a decarbonization study that State Energy Office did, it's clear that there's a significant need, a continued need for lots of renewable energy project development over the next few decades. And with that, we see that project siting and finding good, viable locations for large and medium-sized renewable energy projects may get more difficult. Ulupono did a study a couple years back called Switching the Paradigm, which evaluated kind of the land use needs of renewable energy siting, in particular focus on agricultural land. And one of the results of the study was when you take certain slopes of agricultural land, different grades of that land, it has a potential to use up to 26,000 acres for solar projects on Oahu alone. And that's a significant amount of land potential use. And so we see this, and it's widely recognized as kind of this challenge or balancing act between uh, clean energy projects, sustainable agriculture, housing, conservation, all the things that are priorities for our communities, and those increasing challenges as we look to locate more and more renewable energy projects in our communities. And as a result, we're starting to see more and more engagement in this space. We think, part of the reason this equity docket, the commission opened this docket, is to evaluate these challenges among other issues and try to find ways to improve not only project viability, but make sure host communities are more engaged and can benefit more directly from these projects and have a say. We recognize that, this most recent RFP3 now has a requirement to have a community benefits package as part of the overall scope. Prior to that, it was limited to, it was just directly negotiated between project developers and communities, and now it's a recognized requirement. And then you're starting to see communities engage in something called participatory budgeting, which is kind of a global movement to encourage more engagement from communities and kind of make their own decisions on key issues and priorities, not just energy planning, but all kinds of things around the world. But it's a way for communities to understand if you have a budget or you have an opportunity to do something for your community, how to build that engagement and more closely align with priorities that reflect those communities. And we're starting to see that actually in action here on Molokai. They've done an amazing job this past year and a half with the Molokai Clean Energy Hui. With their own engagement, they've reached out to their community and have undertaken a significant step in their own energy planning, identifying projects, and really starting to chart a path for that island and their community and what they would like to see. And what we're proposing today is nothing new. It's nothing super radical, but it's really just trying to improve the overall outlook for future projects and future project siting, but also to kind of improve the equity and improve the opportunity for communities to stay engaged and actually directly benefit from the projects that are coming into their communities. We're calling it location-based. Essentially, really what we're trying to do is provide a direct financial benefit to host communities and try to improve, as we said, equity for host communities to gain a somewhat larger share of project cost savings compared to the average ratepayer. And what we're proposing is an additional benefit to host communities and not meant to replace, alter, or change any of the already conceived RFP-based community benefits packages that are identified as part of that RFP process, but this would be a separate thing that would be an additional benefit. So to kind of drive that home a little bit more, there's what we're calling on-bill benefit versus off-bill. Off-bill is kind of what I just described, the already included, already conceived in the RFP3 process, and it involves kind of the direct negotiations between community and project developers. We support the use of participatory budgeting approach to improve that decision-making process and support community prioritization. But again, those benefits as negotiated may include direct financial benefits, but they also may include other types of investments, for example, community center, parks, other types of projects. And then what we're proposing today is to not touch the off-bill, benefits, but add something, what we're calling on-bill community benefits, which essentially is just increasing the shared savings, increasing for the community an increased proportion of shared savings of that energy project. We think potentially, depending on energy prices, that it could also perhaps be applied to existing renewable energy projects, where we think there's some benefits here because it would be, as we're proposing it, kind of an upside only kind of benefit. So if there's a discount to be had, the community would share. If there is no discount, if the energy price doesn't allow for that, then they would just pay what everybody else pays. And then finally, it's important to note, and probably most importantly, is that it helps to increase equity between communities that do and do not host projects. So in a nutshell, and I want to caveat this is one way to approach it. We are identifying the idea and some potential ways to address it. However, there are many ways to approach it, and we think, to really identify process and scope, it would need to be part of this ongoing docket process and ultimately determined through the proceeding. But our approach would be to essentially take the avoided energy generation cost and compare it to project PPA price in every billing cycle. And when there's a savings, when there's a delta where the energy price from the project, the renewable energy project, is lower than the avoided cost of generation, to apply a predetermined percentage share of that savings for the community itself. So essentially, you're not taking away, it's not an increase in payments, other than it's just that the community that's hosting the project gets a little bit more of the savings that that project brings. And then again, as I mentioned, when the avoided cost, if and when the avoided cost would actually be lower than the PPA price, then the host communities would pay the same as all other customers and not have to pay more, for example. So it's really kind of an upside only benefit, which we think is pretty attractive. So here's kind of a hypothetical approach to how it would work if you take, and these are all just assumptions, so don't hold me to any pricing or project size or capacity factors or anything like that, but I did try to get close on certain ones. But essentially, if you were to take, for example, a 50 megawatt solar farm, and the power PPA price was 13 cents per kilowatt hour, if you assume that the energy delivered was about 9 million kilowatt hours and the avoided cost was 22 cents per kilowatt hour, a 10% share would be 900,000 kilowatt hours, and it would result in a discount, assuming that there were 3,000 accounts in that defined community, of about $27 per month. Now, that's a lot, and I realize that, I just want to make sure everyone knows that's one way to approach it. But there are some key decision points that would need to be determined that are crucial, namely how much of the percentage, how to arrive at that calculation, and then of course kind of the geographic boundary of those communities, what would be defined or included in that kind of impacted community. So looking at this slide here, this is really just to try and kind of compare and contrast. Really these benefits, if you look at the kind of existing community defined, and it's not to make any judgments on those. I think there's tremendous value. This is just trying to show how there's a little bit of a difference. So RFP3 defined ones can be a lot of times kind of a one-time payment or donation, have a minimum set aside of $1 value. It does give flexibility to the community and developer to determine what fits best. And should, as we said before, leverage participatory budgeting to kind of really fairly represent community needs. However, at times, not everybody in a given community may want whatever the majority decides. And so on this with our on-bill proposal, this would at least capture, everybody else in a direct financial incentive. And hopefully be kind of a formula-driven approach so that everyone understands kind of what, if you're in that community and you're in that designated area, then what you can kind of expect in terms of a potential discount on your bill. And then again, if projects that have gone in the past have a lower PPA price, it is possible that this approach could potentially be applied retroactively. It's what we believe could be hopefully done through billing software and some increased administrative work for Hawaiian Electric. But it should not impact project costs for project developers. So we think there's some benefit there as well. So kind of identified some things that we would need to work on or would need to be identified through a regulatory process. And these are not inclusive of all things, but defining that impacted host community geographically, whether it's sight line or proximity, from the project itself. And then it may vary by project type. You can imagine offshore wind project. It's not going to be in everyone's backyard, but a lot more people will be able to see it visually. And so, the different types of technology may require different kinds of approaches for defining what that impacted host community is. Next would be, again, determining that allocation of cost savings, what that percentage would be for host communities. And then how to do it. What we kind of showed was maybe one way to do it. There's many other ways to possibly approach defining what that and going about calculating those discounts would be. And then there would be an increase in cost for the utility to upgrade their billing software, and then obviously some administrative costs as well to manage that program. So, Ulupono would support recovery of those costs if that meant, this kind of process could be implemented as part of, ongoing projects and new ongoing projects and new projects going forward. And again, I think we're not promising a fix to anything. There are, I think there's kind of a limit into how types of projects that can deploy this kind of approach. For example, firm renewable projects have capacity payments. Projects might not have that same kind of delta. And then over time, the avoided cost and PPA price should close that gap. And so maybe projects many years down the line won't be able to provide the same kind of savings. So it's not a fix for all types of renewable projects, and it's not a fix for forever. So we don't want to oversell it, but we do think there's some value in looking at this and kind of diving deeper into what the potential for increasing that equity for the communities that are currently hosting. So for me personally, I wouldn't mind having a solar farm in my valley. I know there's lots of people who would, and vice versa. We know there's a cost to hosting for communities. We know there's a cost to hosting projects. We don't know what that is. You can't necessarily quantify it if it's quality of life, view plane, other types of opportunity costs. But we think right now, some communities that are currently hosting projects and then communities that will host projects into the future versus ones that don't, the hosting ones, there's already a kind of an inverse subsidization happening. And so this would be an attempt to try and kind of even that out a little bit and kind of give benefits to the communities that are shouldering these projects. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions or anything to add, Murray from Ulupono, our president, also has joined. So if you had any commentary to add.
If there's any questions we can address.
Yeah, so if you have questions, please use the raise your hand feature, or if you feel like putting those questions in the chat, that'd be another way to get them to us. But I want to take some time for folks to ask questions. I see Sunny, you have your hand up. We'll go to you first, and then if folks want to go after, just use the raise your hand feature. But Sunny, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Sunny from Kuhuku Community Association. I'm glad that these things are being discussed. I have a few questions. In coming up with this presentation and how to go about the community benefits package, did you interview and study impacted communities currently that are having these issues with community benefits packages? And I'll just lay out all my questions and then you can just order, answer them in the order you please. But number two, how do you determine which is the host community? Because I know you mentioned this in your presentation. This is the very question that we've struggled with in Kohuku. We have seen in our community a split within our communities, neighboring communities, where neighboring communities decided to support a project that has been vehemently opposed in the host community to get the community benefits package. And just so you know, the bulk of the AES community benefits package, that was an over a year-long fight just to get AES to agree to put those 1.5 million community benefits package funds to a project in Kohuku. It's been a struggle and it's been a cause for a lot of contention within communities and surrounding communities. We have been told by AES that the neighboring community felt that they had the exact same impacts and therefore they wanted some funds. And so, it comes to the question as to like, how do you determine what is the impacted community? Is it by zip code? Is it by how far you live? So those are questions that really, really need to be well thought out and addressed. And even in the process of determining how those community benefits package should be used or which organization it should be dispersed to, because as we speak currently, there has been organizations where part of the community benefits package funds or other community benefits package funds has been dispersed. But there's big question marks as to whether or not they're dispersing it to use it for the betterment of the host community and how that process is done. And when we asked about, how we can hold those organizations accountable, what we've been told is like, oh, there hasn't been really a lot of I guess, policies and procedures that was written down as far as what those organizations needed to be done and need to do to disperse those funds. And so there's no clear guidelines. And so then it's up to the organization and how they do it. So it's just, there's no, I guess, accountability and transparency as far as these community benefits package funds. So these are things that are ongoing as we speak. I'm grateful that AES had finally decided to use the bulk of the community benefits package funds to a project in Kohuku, but it was a huge struggle to even get them to come to this point. And so it's a struggle that we need to address. And even for the I guess the discount when it comes to the electricity rate, in Kohuku we had like a 9-hour power outage while the turbines are spinning and we have no electricity. And so, and then there was a power bill that was introduced a few years ago by Senator Gil Riviere, which never went anywhere. And so, discussion about how these can be implemented for existing projects in Kohuku and the Kohuku community. I'd like to have more clarity on what that process would look like and how that can happen for existing communities. Sorry, I was kind of all over the place, but I just wanted to let you know that, when you're doing these studies, I hope you're reaching out to the impacted communities, because as far as I know, I don't think anybody has reached out to us to really come and learn about some of the impacts and some of the struggles that we've had with community benefit package funds.
Hi, Sonny. This is Murray Clay. I'm with Ulupono as well, work with Michael. So yeah, a lot of questions and comments there. I'll hit as many of them as I can. I may not get quite all of them, but I'll take a shot. So in terms of reaching out to communities, while we didn't have a comprehensive program to visit every community of every project, which as you can imagine would be extremely difficult and time consuming, we have visited many renewable energy projects over the years and have talked to community members in those project areas. It also visited, I think, 2 of the wind farms up on the North Shore. I believe, if memory serves, one of them was Kahuku, and we talked to some of the people that actually lived closest to the windmills. So, not a comprehensive program to talk to everyone, in every community that has a project. We have visited a lot of the communities for a lot of the projects over the years. To your comment of defining the host community, that is a critical issue. Absolutely agree with you. If you define the impacted community too broadly, not only does that, equally weight people that live a long ways and maybe people that live closer to the project, but it also dilutes the value of those community benefits by spreading it over, too broad a geography, too many people to where the value will be less per person. So one of the things we'll have to recognize is in the way that the impacted community is defined, will be very important, and you won't be able to give benefits to every single person that has any impact whatsoever, because someone might not live by it, but they might drive by it, they may not like that. It's just hard to make everyone happy. But what you could do is focus on those that are most impacted, which logically probably is something to do with distance, how close someone is to a project. So whether it's a set distance, Michael mentioned if it's a view plane issue, but it should be fairly tightly defined so that, yeah, someone from quite a distance away shouldn't be getting community benefits for something that's not really in their community. But that's a process the PUC will have to help, take us through in defining those host communities. And then your comment, you mentioned a lot of things about AES. This does not necessarily fix problems, let's just call them broadly, with past community engagement efforts. It doesn't fix that per se, although it does apply sort of bill credits or discounts to folks in those communities. So it helps. It doesn't necessarily solve everything that may have been happening in the past. I would say, though, that for the off bill, so like the RFP, the dollars per megawatt, the existing community benefits that exist, if the participatory budgeting process is followed as we're proposing, it's a much more democratic process. It matches up kind of a community vote, if you will, with feasibility for what they want to fund with that. So I can't hit necessarily everything you talked about. Hopefully I hit a few of the major ones there.
Sonny, for the time being, I'm going to go to Tyler, but if you have any follow-up, we can come back to you. But Tyler, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. For the community benefits packages, there's a lot of condo associations spread throughout the state. Their, RFQ process is done internally, as they have very strict property lines and, accountable number of community members. But each condominium discusses and agrees to their personal community benefits package, which typically does include that sharing model, the sharing benefits and financial model that you highlighted before. But there are, a couple hundred case studies out there of this system active in small communities that would be very interesting to talk to and survey to see how those packages have been set up, how they're working, and what edits or suggestions those community members would have on this. So I think those would be an excellent resource for current packages that could inform future ones.
Yeah, that's helpful. And we are aware, like Michael said, we're not claiming this to be an original idea that we've come up with that no one else has done before. It does exist, not only here, as you mentioned, but also on the mainland. There's been some projects in certain states that have these types of benefits. So it's something we've seen done elsewhere. It seems to increase equity. It seems like it could work here. And yes, as we go through the process of defining host communities and how this would actually work, learning from the existing projects would make a lot of sense.
Thank you.
All right, Kylie, I see you've got your hand up. We'll go to you, and then Sunny, if you've got follow-up, we'll come back to you.
Thank you. And this is just clarifying to see how this would work in the Kahuku context to some of the points that Sunny was saying. So the Kahuku community would still have its ongoing process of negotiating community benefits with AES. But if this new process you're proposing were to go into effect, then affected community members would also just get a direct bill credit on their utility bills, aside from and on top of anything that's happening with the community benefits package, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons we like it, as Michael said, this does not disturb in any way the RFP3 defined community benefits packages, any directly negotiated community benefits packages, doesn't change that, doesn't disturb it in any way. And also, as Michael said, there's no reason for the developer or the utility to necessarily oppose this because it doesn't affect their economics whatsoever. It's basically just recognizing that those communities that are hosting these projects that are saving people money, they're hosting the projects, they deserve a bit more of those savings. So it can be layered on top of existing things without disturbing anything that's already in place.
Yeah, and it sounds to me, I think, like if there are, needs to improve the off-bill community benefits process, that's important. And that what we're proposing here is not meant to improve that process or kind of address that process, I guess. This is an additional kind of separate package or approach to providing an additional benefit. And so we're not trying to say that this would necessarily address the ongoing challenges with defining and improving that process. This is just something separate.
Great. We've got a few more minutes allotted for Q&A. Sunny, thanks for putting that in the chat. I want to make sure if you don't have more to say, if you do have more to say, you're welcome to, but if you don't, you could please lower your raised hand and we'll go to Ryan. Thank you. Okay, Ryan, you're up. I can't hear you, Ryan. Can anyone else hear Ryan? Okay. Let's see. We'll wait for Ryan to sort your audio. I see you've lowered your hand, but I think we might have had somebody else raise. Dennis Rose. Would you like to ask a question or provide a comment?
Mahalo, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. What is the process, and apologies if you might have covered this, what is the process to ensure equity between different communities to make sure the benefits, one community negotiates better than another community for equal impacts? What's the process to make sure that everyone negotiates equally and that for similar impacts, there's similar benefits achieved? Does that make sense?
So yeah, the idea here is that the communities that are hosting projects are currently impacted more so than neighboring communities that aren't impacted or don't have less of an impact if it's not hosted in their community. So trying to give an increased incentive or benefit to the communities that host those projects.
Let me clarify a little
Okay.
bit. So a community that's impacted on Maui versus a community that's impacted in Honolulu, the people in Honolulu have been through this before. They are very savvy negotiators and they're going to negotiate really well. They're going to get $50 credit. The community in Maui, this is their first time through it. Same impact. They're only going to get $10 because they didn't negotiate as well. What's the oversight to make sure, hey, equal impact, you get equal or close to it as can be? Mahalo.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I understand what you're saying. What we're proposing is it would be formulaic. So this would be through a process that the commission would impose. And so it would be through that process, clearly define if it's certain types of projects, then perhaps, this type of percentage or this kind of thing would need to happen. So the process would happen as it wouldn't require direct negotiation between the communities, but rather it's an, kind of a formulaic approach.
And is there a review to make sure that that happens, just so down the line, we don't get lawsuits to say, oh, this community was low income and they were adversely impacted? Formulaic, but with reviews.
Yeah, so, the process and how it would be ultimately done, it still needs to be developed. We're trying to kind of present an idea of a way to increase the kind of equity between communities that host and communities that don't. The process to make sure that there is oversight, that it is evenly or well developed and then deployed correctly, needs to be created and done. So yeah, I share your concerns and recognize that that would necessarily need to be part of the process. There have been discussions, and when we've had some discussions with other folks, other stakeholders about this idea, that is one of the questions that actually came up. Can you really do it formulaically, like all types of technology, you get this kind of incentive, or is it really going to have to be project by project? So that, again, that's something that would need to be discussed and determined through a process, regulatory process.
And I just want to be clear before we get to the next questions that the idea here being presented is from Ulupono, and I hope it helps you frame your thoughts on the staff report and any comments you might want to provide on it. But it's not currently a commission proposal, but it's something we're interested in learning more about and hearing this group's thoughts on. So just want to make sure we're clear on that. We have one question in the chat from Guest, who I don't know who that is, but they want to know who would fund these benefits. I know you talked about that a little bit, but maybe if you could just walk us through again how the money would flow, then we'll go to Henry, and then we'll see if we can wrap up with Ryan and Sunny.
Okay, so the concept is based on kind of the difference between the PPA price of a project and the avoided cost of energy. There's a delta between how much the cost of the energy that's provided by a new renewable energy project and the existing kind of cost to provide electricity that Hawaiian Electric does. Ostensibly, as you aggregate more and more of these projects, that should help to bring down the total cost of electricity for everybody. But what we're proposing is that for a given project, that share of savings, a portion of that share, an increased portion, goes to the host community. So it's, I guess, less spread out for the rest of the customers, but that community is getting a little bit more of that share. And we view that as an equity, more equitable approach, because ostensibly community like Kahala, not to pick on any communities, but they don't have any projects, whereas other communities do, and they're getting the same benefit financially right now. So if there's a way to give those communities that are hosting a little bit more of a savings as a result of doing the work of hosting the projects, then that's kind of what we're trying to address here.
Thanks for that. I hope that helps. Henry, you're up next.
Yes, for both on-bill and off-bill benefits, there is, as Dennis has pointed out, savvy communities and non-savvy communities, first-time communities, and certainly those who, if we open up a docket to look at all these on-bill and off-bill options, it would be handy to have a table or a website listing to show all the benefits that have been received by all the different communities to sort of level the playing field so that when a new project, perhaps with a new technology pops up, everybody can be at the same level and understanding.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on that, Henry. So yeah, valid point for sure. One of the nice things, as Michael said, about this process of on-bill benefits that we're talking about is there is no difference, if you will, in negotiating power. It's not utility or developer versus community. It's the PUC saying, here's the percentage sharing. This is how the impacted community will be defined. So there's no issues of negotiating power. For the off bill, the existing RFP dollars per megawatt hour and previously negotiated community benefits, there is that difference, Henry, that you just mentioned. And for that reason, on the off bill, the existing community benefits, we have proposed that participatory budgeting be used. I can't recall, Michael, if we shared our white paper on participatory budgeting as part of the materials for this presentation. We haven't, we should share it. But that process is highly structured to make sure a more democratic, more community-supported outcome comes from those off-bill community benefit packages. So PB is something that's gaining traction kind of worldwide to make sure that you don't have these differences in negotiating power. The outcome is really what the community wants and not what a few individuals want or what the developer wants. It's a much more democratic process. So if we haven't shared our white paper, we need to do that, and I'll make sure, Michael and I will make sure that happens.
Yeah, feel free to please file that in the docket if you'd like, and we can link to it on our website, whatever makes sense. We do want to make sure we have time for a discussion of the staff report. So if you have other things to say, please put them in the chat. But I will go to you, Ryan, one more time for see if we can get your audio working. So go ahead, Ryan.
While we wait for
Can you hear me
Ryan,
now?
if I may say
Yeah,
something
Ryan.
really
Oh,
quick.
I think we just
Hey,
heard Ryan. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I had to call in and I'm having trouble. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Awesome. Great conversation as usual. I guess, first of all, I do think that given the high level nature of this conversation, that, I mean, there still is the possibility that certain communities could be disproportionately impacted by the negotiating ability. Perhaps it involves how the community is defined, right? We still don't know what rules or procedures would come out of this and how a community would be defined. And there may be ways in which certain communities who have different abilities might negotiate different definitions of community. So I think it's important to realize that, you know, nothing is ever cut and dry. I've seen way too many things that we thought were cut and dry have developers and or other people work their way around. The other thing is I'm kind of hesitant about the term avoided costs. And maybe it's just because I've been doing this longer than a lot of people that I'm having like purple flashbacks and geothermal flashbacks. And we had that avoided cost fight already in the use of it. I mean, I understand it here, but I think the reality is that as time goes on, that avoided cost is going to become minimal. And as you guys admitted, that margin will shrink to nothing. And so that really it's a community benefit of diminishing returns. And I'm not sure that given that definition of the use of avoided costs in that way, really the juice is worth the squeeze for the communities in that, I mean, I think developers and decision makers might be able to use this as a way to say, hey, the communities are getting something else out of this. Well, in reality, they're getting $27 discount possibility on their monthly bill, but how does that factor into the already inflation cost they're going through? How's that account to other means? And that $27, I think, is going to be diminishing very quickly, especially if Hawaiian Electric can get on board with low-cost renewables. So just given that, I think that there's a lot to be talked through, and I appreciate the concept, but I just warn against always, you know, throwing these high-level ideas out there without really bringing the community involved again. And you know, just again noting there's really not much community involvement, and I appreciate Ulupona's efforts to go out and talk to the community. However, I mean, did you talk to the community about this very idea? Was there community meetings and such. So I think those all things need to happen to get involved with something behind this. But I appreciate the conversation. And I would note that I do think, generally speaking, from my efforts, that's one of the first things the communities do say is, hey, is this going to lower our cost of electricity? And I think if you're going to say it's got to lower their cost of electricity substantially. And they're not looking for going from a $300 bill to a $275 bill. That's really not going to do much for the communities that need this the most. So, while I appreciate the efforts, I think that we need to think a little bit bigger if we're really going to use something like this. But I also want to reiterate that we never want something like this to be used to force a project on a community. And a community needs to have the ability to consent to major utility projects within their confines. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks everybody who's been putting their comments and questions in the chat. I don't want to cut this discussion too short, but Sunny, if you can wrap us up in about a minute, I want to be able to make sure we have enough time for the rest of today's agenda. So if you'd like to go, please keep it brief, but please go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to reiterate what I just commented. No amount of community benefits package will justify what happened to the Kahuku community and the impacts we are facing. So first and foremost, need to make sure that communities support and we have consent before we even talk about community benefits package. And part of the struggle was in Kahuku specifically that the community liaison for AES was not from the host community, really contradicting the host community's best interest. So while we're discussing these processes and discussing how these funds are being dispersed, we need to make sure that the communities involved in this process, that the host communities have input, have voice, there's transparency and accountabilities and guidelines to ensure that whichever organizations that are getting these funds are using it for the betterment of the community. And Ulupono, I know I've invited previous people from Ulupono to come to Kahuku to talk about the setback. And then I'm grateful that you guys decided afterwards, seeing the impacts, supporting a longer setback of 1.25 or 1. Anyways, you're more than welcome to come again to talk about, to learn more about our specific experiences, and hopefully that will give you some insight as to what needs to be changed and what specific guidelines can help.
Great. Thanks everybody for this great discussion, and feel free to continue it in the chat. But for now, I think we need to move along to the next part of our agenda, which is a review of the staff report. So I'll turn it over to you, Pete, Eric, and Max.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to Ulupono and everybody for that very informed presentation and discussion. Share my screen real quick. All right, so I'll also put the link to the staff report in the chat real quick for anybody who has not had a chance to pull that up or see it yet. Hopefully that works. So as you may have seen in the docket, we filed a draft staff report trying to summarize and collectively come to a set of recommendations for Hawaiian Electric in the upcoming IGP RFPs, as well as beyond, for how to better embed and incorporate improvements to improve equitable outcomes of the procurement process. As you'll note in the report, we have it divided into 3 overall sections. The first is providing an introduction and contextualization of the series of meetings we've had that is culminating in this meeting. We also provide a summary with links to additional materials for each of the 5 meetings. And then we wrap up with a set of recommendations that are also divided into 3 broader categories that we sort of tried to drill down on from all of the information we have learned, presented, and received from feedback, both verbally in the meetings and written feedback so far in this series of meetings. So the first set of recommendations focuses on near-term improvements, really, for this upcoming set of RFPs, what staff felt can be implemented in the near term to really these fine-tuned recommendations to improve the IGP RFPs, In addition, we have identified some long-term process changes that there was pretty substantial discussion about within this series of meetings, but may need some additional, work to really drill down and define how these improvements can work within the RFP process or affect the RFP process throughout either the equity docket or within future procurement or planning dockets as well. And then we have just a set of additional ideas that we've marked as really important for the procurement process, but didn't find it specifically in either of these buckets of near-term or long-term process changes, and maybe some additional ideas to enable these other improvements, and not just squarely within the procurement process. We'll go through each of these in a bit more detail, and then we'll have some breakout groups to hopefully, elevate and enable you all to provide more feedback here. There will also be an opportunity to provide written feedback in the docket as well. So I will pass it to Eric now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Sipper, and I'm a Department of Energy Clean Energy Innovator at the Commission. I'm going to be talking about evaluation criteria and community benefits packages. Next slide, please. So just to zoom out for a second, when we say evaluation criteria, so as we've discussed throughout these meetings, the renewable resource procurement is the process that Hawaiian Electric goes through. They come up with this essentially a rubric. They receive projects that are then graded. That rubric is approved by the commission. So this evaluation criteria is how those bids are going to be evaluated. And this is potential near-term changes from the most recent bidding process for the future IGP RFP bidding process. So some potential changes and recommendations that we identify in the report are changing the weighting of price and non-price criteria. So currently price counts as 60% of how a project is graded, and non-price criteria are 40%. We give a couple different ideas here. You could do 50-50 price and non-price. You could also actually separate community benefits and community outreach as a separate third category. A second recommendation is publicizing threshold criteria. So things like safety and community outreach, many of these are already threshold criteria in the current RFP, but really making that clear and fleshing those out even more. Third, expanding the scoring range for individual non-price criteria from 1 to 5 to 1 to 10. So currently on many of these criteria, such as community outreach, developers receive a score that's somewhere between 1 and 5. You can imagine how that could be difficult to really judge quality. So what really is the difference between a 2 and a 3 or a 3 and a 4? With a 1 through 10, it's a bit easier to tell the difference between, say, a 6 and an 8 versus a 2 and a 3 or something like that. Another recommendation is reducing the number of non-price criteria by converting some of those into threshold requirements. So just to be clear, a threshold requirement is something that the developer absolutely has to do for the project to move forward. It isn't something that they're just graded on. It's the threshold, the bare minimum. And then finally, consider including new criteria or updating existing criteria to reflect priorities emerging from this series of discussions. So things we've heard a lot about include resilience, project siting, local economic benefits, and community co-design elements. So these could be new criteria that are added to the next RFP process, and we could also tweak existing criteria to more heavily reflect some of these priorities we've heard. Next slide. This next set of recommendations has to do with community benefits packages. So our first recommendation is allowing more flexibility in how community benefits are calculated for a project. So this gives developers and communities the ability to come up with a community benefits packages that really fits the need of that individual community. But as we've discussed in this meeting, we want to make sure that communities who aren't used to negotiating with developers don't receive less than they deserve. So really making sure that there still is a minimum threshold while building in more flexibility. Another potential recommendation is incorporating an inflation index. So we know that inflation has become a large issue, and community benefits, if they receive X amount of dollars in 10 years, that's not going to be worth as much as it is today. So building in an inflation index on those community benefits. Third, exploring new enforcement mechanisms. So how do we make sure that community benefits packages for communities actually go to those communities, make sure it's happening year after year, and figuring out exactly who can enforce that and who should be enforcing that to protect communities. Fourth, incorporate the option for participatory budgeting for trusted community-based organizations, negotiating on community benefits packages with developers on behalf of a community. So really using these participatory budgeting tools that groups such as Ulupono have been working on, and relying on trusted community-based organizations to reduce the lift needed by the community. And then finally, providing a publicly available scoring rubric for the community outreach criteria within the non-price criteria. So importantly, this would not actually show the scores that each developer receives. A lot of that is very sensitive market information, but at the very least, making the scoring rubric available for community outreach so that communities and developers, so everyone has more knowledge of what that actually looks like. And with that, I will hand it off to Max.
Yeah, so there are a few additional recommendations that the staff are also making for the upcoming IGP RFP. Some of these actually tie to both the near-term and long-term recommendations. So there's some overlap or synergies, let's say, for lack of a better word. One of them that we're putting forward is the establishment of an equitable RFP procurement advisory group. This is something that would be a voluntary initiative where members from possibly these meetings could come forward and support the commission, support HECO, support developers through the RFP procurement process in advising on equity-related topics. Another thing that we're putting forward is to promote or give preference to projects that spearhead this community co-creation idea that was presented by the Energy Equity Hui in meeting 4, and that we'll talk about as well in the long-term recommendations. But we see this as an innovative idea, and we'd like to find a way that maybe in the evaluation criteria, there are bonus points provided for projects that bid an option for piloting this with communities. We also want to see bids that have opportunities or more thoughtful use of community involvement throughout the RFP process, as well as give preference to developers who start using renewable energy zones, which ideally can address issues of siting and have community input already baked in so that we know ahead of time that these are acceptable places for them to go. Would you go to the next slide, please? When we talk about long-term process changes, we're talking about a few things. And again, to note, the IGP RFP process is going to come in waves, just as the last few stages of RFP did as well. We expect these to be approximately 18 months apart. So while the near-term ones will focus on this year's IGP RFP that will come through, these process changes are for next waves in subsequent years. And again, one of them that we're looking at is how do we promote more community co-creation? This, I think, is something that came up a lot, again, presented by the Energy Equity Hui as an idea that they promoted. And our current recommendation is to support ways for this to be piloted in subsequent or this RFP process because of the complexity and amount of time required from this proposal. And hopefully a pilot phase can go through, and then maybe in the next wave, it can be included throughout. And we'll see as the pilot goes, what kind of learnings will come out of that as well. Another idea we'd like to see be promoted and used is the community energy boards. Again, something that came out of the energy equity HUI and was presented in depth during metering 4. And the community energy boards could have a variety of benefits. For instance, they could be a conduit for community messages, community involvement, and represent communities. They could have, oversight and institutional knowledge for different community benefit packages and how to administer them, work with developers. But there are some questions about how exactly this would work, what exactly these would look like, what legislative policy may need to be introduced, what other commissions or boards would they be based off of. Because of these more complex questions, we want to continue to develop this idea and see where this can go, possibly in subsequent rounds. But it's something that we're hoping will emerge further. Would you go to the next slide, please? Finally, there are a number of these additional long-term recommendations where these are kind of sticky issues that we want to continue to address, but that we don't feel are ready for this immediate IGP RFP at the moment. For instance, how do we define what exactly the community or the host community is? This came up in Michael's presentation. I think that this has come up in virtually every meeting throughout this process. And it doesn't appear that there's an obvious, clear way to do this right now. But it's something that we don't want to fall off the table and be unaddressed in the future. Similarly, how do we address the rural-urban divide of where these projects go? What is a fair way to determine that? Again, citing maybe renewable energy zones is a possibility, as we maybe introducing community co-creation is a possibility, but how exactly we address this is something we want to continue to have on the long term, but that is not here in the moment of the near term. Similarly, models for community ownership or alternative mechanisms for community benefits. And when we talk about ownership, one thing that came up a lot in these meetings was, what does ownership look like with communities? Is it actual profit sharing and ownership of equity in these businesses? Is it a consortium of developers, large and small, from communities? Is it a accumulation of equity over time that then transferred? Something like that. There's different ways that this could go, but again, and something that we heard a lot as being important to people, but we want to see how and learn more, discuss how this could work, and possibly if it could be a way for community benefit packages to also come into play. Is it that profit sharing then goes to bill credits or preferential rates? Finally, we also want to look at, with the development of legally binding, this is, I know, something that Eric just talked about. These community benefit packages, they could become also community benefit agreements, but at the moment, that's also more complex, requires a increased cost, increased time, and that we want to see how these go for now, and then finally have more learning down the road. And at the end, we also want to make sure that throughout the rest of the series of RFP waves, we continue to improve education and outreach efforts to communities. We recognize that, a lot of these electricity and energy engineering related topics, they can be complex and highly technical. And we heard throughout that communities want to be able to have a level playing field to the extent possible with developers, whether on technical or legal matters or financial matters. And we want to address this by taking up as the commission with the utility and maybe the state energy office or the University of Hawaii, better education and outreach for stakeholders to help level that playing field. And then I'll have Pete bring us home.
Thanks, Max. And I see Henry's hand up in the participant list, but we'll have a section for Q&A right after I walk through these final additional ideas. So we also wanted to make sure we didn't lose sight of additional ideas that have been elevated throughout this discussion that are important for equity in the procurement process, but may not fit into this structure of near-term improvements and longer-term process changes, just to better evaluate the tools we're setting up, and just improve equity in general. So we've got 4 ideas here that we identify as very important to continue discussing and continue looking at. Like I said, we don't want to lose sight of them. The first is potentially creating a mechanism to evaluate the effectiveness of these RFP revisions that we are working on through this process, and will be continuing to work on through these iterations of procurements. Specifically addressing how well do these changes we're making, these improvements we're identifying for the RFP, actually translate into improved equitable outcomes when projects go through the procurement, community engagement process, and construction, and come online and start delivering energy and community benefits. Another is to evaluate how to provide benefits to communities who have hosted energy projects within or near the communities in the past. And as we saw that during Michael's presentation, this came up as well. There might be additional mechanisms or methods to look at communities that have historically hosted and had the burden of energy infrastructure and energy projects. How we can recognize those potential inequities and address them, both within this equity docket and elsewhere. Related to improving education and outreach efforts, and really enabling communities to better participate in the procurement process and the community engagement process, looking at how to develop intervener compensation, training initiatives, and other programs that just generally support community engagement at the commission and elsewhere in the energy sector. And then finally, one issue staff has noted that is still sort of ripe for comment within this docket, or on this staff report, is determining whether intervention in the procurement dockets moving forward is appropriate, and what procedural mechanisms may require modification to align with whatever this determination may be. I will stop there and pause for questions. Henry, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I have 3 general observations. First, you discussed renewable energy zones and urban-rural divide, but all renewable energy zones exist only in rural areas. Second, discuss evaluation criteria and rubrics, but as long as the community can't see the wizard behind the curtain, or HECO's black box process, then defining what inputs are considered is largely meaningless. And third, there was discussion about whether communities should be able to intervene in how RFPs are designed and that kind of stuff. And failure to address this may result in long litigation that will delay everything.
Thanks for those comments, Henry. I think, yep, those are important points, and we're open to additional comments and questions to help us revise this draft staff report to turn into a final staff report that hopefully truly reflects the work we've done in this series of meetings. Ryan? Ryan, I see you had your hand up and put it down and have come off again, but I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? I'm got
Yes.
to unmute 2 things.
Yes, I can hear you.
This staff report will be filed in the equity docket, but will it also be filed in the RFP docket? I guess I'm slightly concerned that there's recommendations coming out now, and how those recommendations will be used. I appreciate the efforts, but it's worth noting that there's still minimal to none community involvement here. And it seems like a lot of these recommendations are relying on other entities and organizations like the Energy Equity Hui, which the Energy Equity Hui itself has virtually no community involvement as well. So I guess, could you guys just clarify how the staff report will be used, how the recommendations will be used, And at what point, when will the community have an opportunity to actually comment on the staff report or the recommendations before they're implemented? Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. So the intent of the staff report is definitely not to just file it in the equity docket and then forget about it in other dockets or anything like that. You know, the step we're at right now is really intending to get as much feedback as we can on these recommendations, but this is certainly not the end of the process for these recommendations. As you noted, there's quite a few that rely on potentially or would involve potentially other entities aside from the commission and the stakeholders working here. We can look at filing this in other dockets, including the upcoming RFP docket, and continuing to try to get feedback on these recommendations and turn these recommendations into more refined proposals as well. I think we're still at the process of getting feedback on these specific recommendations right now. We can continue to work on what we do with the recommendations moving forward.
Right. Maybe also just to address your question about when the community would have a chance to give input on this, or whether or not these are strictly coming from outside, groups like the Energy Equity Hui. We really tried to focus these recommendations in the report on what people were saying in these meetings throughout this entire process, and really try to say that, to the extent when people participated and they had ideas and ideas came up over and over again, we incorporated those ideas almost verbatim into these recommendations in many instances. And so we really try to hear people in these meetings and show that through this report.
Thanks, Max. I think Kylie is next, and then Marty and Sherry.
Hi, I had 3 questions. The first was, there was an additional recommendation to create an RFP procurement advisory group. And my question kind of goes to Henry's point about what type of visibility the advisory group would have over the projects being proposed as part of the RFP process. And then the second question is, there was an additional recommendation to provide preference to developers who cite projects in preferred renewable energy zones. I'm just curious how preferred renewable energy zone will be determined, because my understanding, not being super familiar with the process, is that the renewable energy zones were developed based on low cost for transmission upgrades, and then preferences were stated by people going to a website and dropping a pin. So I just don't know if there's been like a fully vetted process to determine what is a preferred renewable energy zone. And then the third question is, to the extent that there's like parking lot items for long-term stuff or additional ideas, are these additional ideas going to be communicated to the third-party contractor that the PUC hires to shape the energy equity docket going forward?
Thanks for those questions. I'll start us off, and then others from the PUC feel free to jump in. I think I'll start with the preferred or the renewable energy zones. So we noted in the staff reports that renewable energy zones are an innovative concept at this point. The commission has not provided any determination about the use of those in the energy procurement process right now. So at this point, the way the preferences or preferred renewable energy zones have been determined is through the integrated grid planning process. So what we attempted to communicate in the draft report is, these zones still require more exploration to sort of embed into the process, but we support improvements to sort of the siting process that may enable more equitable outcomes if a project identified in a renewable energy zone already has some sort of community engagement before the project even bids in, and may reflect the community engagement that was received through that renewable energy zone process. That's why it's, it's part of a recommendation to provide preference and not necessarily any requirement about siting in renewable energy zones, and just hopefully elevating that much more community engagement into the process for siting. Let's see. For your third question on parking lot items for long-term ideas, I think whenever we are integrating the consultants into this docket, we will certainly be bringing them up to speed on the recommendations from this work stream that come out of it and all of the things we talked about, including these long-term ideas. I don't think we know exactly at this point, whether we'll I think you mentioned kicking them to the contractor. I think it'll be much more of a collaborative process in determining, what are the priorities for fleshing out these ideas or working on other tracks within the docket moving forward. I don't know, Ashley, if you would like to add anything to that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Nothing to add, thanks.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, and back to your first question on the RFP procurement advisory group. I believe your question was about what type of visibility this group would have over projects. This is still that's a good question for framing this recommendation in the final report. I think we have envisioned this group as assisting the commission in this sort of review of procurement. So I think it's might not have the same level of visibility in terms of specific project bids and everything like that are developers confidential information. But I think the commission would seek, or what sort of feedback and input the commission would seek from that group, I think is still yet to be determined. And that's really helpful feedback if you have any ideas about what would be the appropriate feedback on the siting of projects, whether the community benefits agreements or packages are appropriate, other things of that nature. I think that would still be helpful at this point. We'll stop there in case anybody else from the commission would like to add anything. But if not, we'll move on to Marty.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to add to Kylie's comments to say thank you guys very much. I realize that you put a lot of work into this, and it's nice to hear that we are being heard. I see some of the reflection in the content that you guys presented, comments that were collected over the years, over these hearings. And I especially appreciate you guys acknowledging the things that you don't know yet and that still need to be determined, like defining what the community is. Like that is that's a key linchpin, right, for how all of this shakes out. And, if we can get that definition right, I think we will be able to address a lot of concerns and hesitancy. But I at least appreciate you all acknowledging where work and attention is needed. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to trying to help with getting more input on this as you guys are going through your iterative process. And I was wondering if the PUC might consider doing this presentation in a recorded webinar kind of format that people could take around to their different communities and show at whatever civic club meetings, or we could find different events where we could show a shortened version of this kind of presentation so people can start to understand what's being discussed and maybe start to engage more in the energy equity hui, which I think is a great group, or other platforms that people might feel more comfortable engaging in. And once again, thanks very much, and keep on keeping on.
Thanks, Marty. I might defer to Mike or Grace for that question.
So yeah, as a general matter, we're really excited to have any partnership opportunities to spread word of what we're doing here. Please reach out to me if there's some way that we can be of use in getting that together. I think one of the general ideas of this docket has, from the beginning, has been education. We know that's needed. So, yeah, happy to provide that in a way that makes sense. So, yeah, just send me an email or, yeah, reach out. And that's not just for you, Marty. That's for anybody. If we can spread the word about this, we'd really love to do that. So. Let us know and we'll find a way to do it that makes sense.
Thanks, Mike. Let's go to Jerry and then for our last question before we go into breakout groups.
Fine, thanks. Actually, this is more of a comment. You know, from the very beginning in this docket, as well as some other cognate dockets, the emphasis has been on community participation and input. And the comments just made by Kylie and Marty kind of also at least implicitly refer to that. But the statistical analysis of participation in all of these sessions has been either a handful or less than a handful of people from the community. There are a lot of people from the constituent organizations, but very few from the community. And a couple of people from the community have indicated the difficulties and constraints that they have to participate in something like this. And what I find a little bit interesting, and this is the basis for my comment, if one really wants community input, then like any other marketing exercise, you have to go to the community. And I was intrigued by the scope of work for the community or the participation consultant, that nowhere there was there an item where the PUC and its staff and its consultants and maybe the commissioners themselves would have a series of meetings in neighborhoods around each of the various islands where either the most or a lot of interest has been generated on project siting, or where people are willing to participate in that if the commission went out into the community. Because people, we know intuitively and otherwise, especially if you're working 2 or 3 jobs and live in outlying areas, you're not going to drive into the downtown to participate in a program. You probably are not going to get on your computer, assuming you have one, to tune into this program, and so forth and so on. And yet when people from the community have participated as just recently in this session, and the input has been very passionate, very focused, very heartfelt, and very relevant. So I think we run into a situation here where the staff report, putting aside the merits of its recommendations, is kind of a summary of the discussions that have been had by audiences that really lack much community participation in the way that is talked about. So I just raised that as a general comment and as a question of curiosity, why thought has not been given to go out into the communities as opposed to expect the communities to come to these sessions. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. And yeah, it's definitely a concern of ours. It's something we've heard really clearly from folks in these meetings, and just want to say thank you again for the feedback that we've gotten. The commission is not used to doing community outreach, and that's we'll talk about it a little bit at the end, but that's really why we're seeking outside help, why we're trying to get a consultant to help us do this work. We certainly have thought about visiting different communities as a part of this docket. We've thought about visiting communities on every island in the state as part of this docket. We've thought about how we can best use what resources we have to get more people to the table. We hear that is critically important. What we're trying to do here is balance and I think Ryan, you said that in the chat very nicely, that we're trying to balance the need to hear more voices to get people to know what's going on here, with also getting something related to equity, some equity improvements into the procurements that are going to be proposed really soon. And it's not easy, and it's I don't expect we're going to balance it perfectly, but that's our goal, is to try and leverage some of the really good discussions we've had in these meetings soon, while also trying to really get the support we need on the outreach that we is not one of our really core skills. And it's I want to apologize in advance because we're not going to get it perfect, but we're here. We hear you loud and clear, and we're trying.
You know, one thing to consider, and this is my last point on this one to consider. Several years ago, under different leadership, the commission did hold neighbor island meetings. The commission itself. One was, I think, in connection with Nextera, but even previous to that, it was in connection with a rate case in HECO. And the commission had meetings which were extremely well attended, both in Hilo as well as in Kailua Kona. So there is precedent for that. Unusual, yes, but there is precedent for that. And I think the feedback from the communities where those sessions took place was deemed to be highly important. So might consider that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for the robust questions. As a reminder, you're certainly welcome to add any additional comments in the chat. We'll be going to breakout groups now, and we're just going to be setting up 3 breakout groups. Feel free to choose whichever you'd like to join. Eric, Max, and I will be facilitating these breakout groups. We're hoping to have about an even number of people in each of these groups, when we'll just be discussing in more detail some of these recommendations and your thoughts on these recommendations for the next 20 minutes or so, and then we'll return just to wrap up with closing in next steps for this report and this docket. So Lika, if you could go ahead and set up those breakout groups.
Do all the groups discuss the same thing?
Yes, the group should be discussing the same questions, but we just want to break people apart here so we have an even number of people in the rooms here. At least try to get them even. Right, you guys should have received a prompt to choose which breakout room you guys want to join. So feel free to jump into that.
Where's the prop, and how do we ensure equal numbers if we're each choosing which group to go into?
Right, Henry. Not too sure what the prompt looks like, but it should have popped up. But as of right now,
I saw nothing.
breakout room, nothing popped up on your guys' screen.
Me either. Hey, Lika, I'm seeing at the top right, or sorry, at the bottom of the screen, if folks click on participants, it says breakout rooms have started and you can choose a session there at the top right.
All right, thank you, Grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Henry. So I guess if you're on a computer, just try click the participants panel, and then it should give you a button there that says choose a session.
Right.
So as of right now,
The choose a session popped up for an instant and then disappeared.
Try open the participants tab again.
Yeah, it is open.
It's open. At the very top, do you see it?
Yes, it says breakout sessions have started. Click on choose a session. I click on choose a session and nothing happens.
All right, give me a sec here.
Oh, I got it now. Thank you.
All right. So I guess as of right now, we got a pretty even number. Session number 3 has 10 people compared to the 12 for the other 2. All right. Thank you, everybody.
I'm still not seeing the panel invite.
All right. I apologize here. So are you working off of a computer or other device?
Laptop, yeah.
Laptop. All right. So I guess if you look at the bottom of your WebEx, at the WebEx window, at the bottom right, there should be like, was that like four little tabs? The farthest right is the three buttons. The second one from the left should be participants panel. So if you click that, either at the very top or on the bottom, depending, I guess, how WebEx is running your laptop, it should say breakout sessions have started, and there should be a little
See.
button.
Yes, thank you.
There you go. Good. Thank you. Anyone else in this main room have trouble getting into a breakout group? I see we might have a couple call-in users. So any call-in users, I'm not too sure how to prompt it on the phone, but I can manually assign you. You just or anyone in the room, please let me know. I'll try to get you in manually. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for those great discussions in the breakout group. We've taken, and as we've done in the past, we'll put the notes out on the website, not for attribution in the breakout groups, but we'll capture the themes. And if we missed anything, you're free to let us know that, and we can get those updated. And again, thanks for staying a little late, but hopefully we can write this down in just a few moments. Really focus on the staff report. That's really what we need. I hope this discussion has spurred your own thinking and will help you share your feedback with us on the staff report. It was put into the docket on the 15th. Please, if you can, provide written feedback by March 1st, so a week from Friday. And then our plan is to take all of the feedback we get and revise the draft report and hopefully develop a final report that we will file in this docket in March. And then the plan, I think, is to also spread it around to other commission proceedings and specifically to the draft, to the IGP RFP, to at least have all this good thinking that we've done together be in that docket. The other thing I wanted to share is just an update on our consultant procurement. So as I've said, we're looking for help to work on our outreach. We've heard a lot of good feedback on that already. And so thank you. If you've filed comments on that consultant scope, thank you so much. It really helps us do a better job. But we're hoping to get that out into the world as soon as possible. So keep your eyes out on the docket, and we'll have updates soon. And then the last big thing, I said this at the top, but I'll reiterate. This docket is by no means finished. We've been on this focused work on the IGP RFPs, but we are planning to resume all of the work in the other tracks. We haven't quite figured out an order if we want to do all of the tracks at once, if we want to do maybe focus, as we have been doing on the IGP RFPs, on maybe focusing on one or two of the tracks. But if you have any thoughts on that, anything you'd like to share with us, we are always open for comments on equity. So please either go to the webpage that's listed on the slide, email any of us, file comments on the docket. We want to know what you think we should do next, but hopefully we will be sharing some, once we finalize the staff report, I think that's when we're planning to share those ideas about what's happening, what could happen next in this docket. So again, thanks for staying over by a couple of minutes. Thanks for all of your wonderful participation in the breakout groups, and keep your eyes out on the equity webpage, where we will post all of our updates, our meeting notes, the recording of this, and feel free to share it far and wide. And finally, any questions, any concerns, any comments about this, please just reach out. We are here for you to talk about equity.